Something wicked comes this way. Hello, ladies and gents, boys and girls, people of all ages, sexualities, and identities, and welcome back to another series/film review. Today is a very interesting one because today we explore the wonderful Wizard of Oz world, with the film/play Wicked. So, without further ado, grab your green face paint, your broomsticks, your magical wands, and your buddies, because we're going down the yellow brick road. Now, pre-warning before we get into this review, if you have not watched the entire play, please click off this video right now, because if you've only watched the first half of the film, you're gonna find a lot of gaps in your knowledge, and it's not gonna make this video as enjoyable for you as I would like it to be. So please either go and watch the play from start to finish, or wait and come back to this video when the second half of this film comes out, and then you can come back and you can learn the rest of the story with the rest of us, so that you can get the full experience. You have been warned. Thank you for listening. And now let's get into the story. So what is Wicked about, you may be asking? Well, Wicked is about the Wicked Witch of the West. We take a dive back into her history and finally learn the truth behind the woman who is seen in The Wizard of Oz as the most wickedest, vilest sorceress of all times. But she wasn't always this way. She starts off in a childhood which she cannot choose, as Glinda points out. Turns out that she had a mother and a father just like anyone else. But it turns out that her mother wasn't as faithful to her father as she was led to believe. Turns out she had an affair with an anonymous man who gave her a potion, and ever since then, Glinda is the only one out of her and her sister with green skin. She grows up trying to adapt to her life in Oz, but finds it an absolute struggle as everyone in Oz seems to despise her for having green skin, a common correlation between the real world and the Wizard of Oz. But despite this prejudice, Elphaba will not let it get her down, and so she goes off to Swizz. I do apologise to everyone out there that's a massive Wicked fan. Please correct me in the comments. But she goes off to a school in hopes to better herself in her life, in her world, and move forward with her life without having to constantly worry about her problems and her appearance. For most of Elphaba's life, she was raised by the animals, and this is why she has such a kindness for them. Whilst at school, she gets paired up with Glinda, and the pair of them begin to bicker over their room arrangement. But over time, their relationship begins to shift and change. A friendship, or maybe more, begins to blossom, and the pair of them finally realise that they're not so unalike as they may seem. Glinda appears as the pretty girl who has everything to everyone, and Elphaba is someone who's kind of just more invested in her studies, so as long as people stay away from her, Elphaba does not care. However, during a scene in the courtyard, Elphaba loses control and accidentally lifts her sister up into the air in her wheelchair, and slowly but surely manages to bring her back down to the ground safely. This catches the attention of another sorceress, a sorceress who will intend to bring Elphaba down to the ground at some point. And of course, as the play progresses, we begin to realise how Elphaba is groomed into believing what she is learning is all for her benefit. Meanwhile, at the school, Elphaba gets an invitation from the Great Wizard of Oz himself to come and visit him in his Emerald City. But before this, of course, there is a big dance coming up, and Fiyero, I think I'm saying that right, invites Glinda, and Glinda invites Elphaba. During a little tiff between the pair of them, it turns out that Glinda gives Elphaba the Wicked Witch hat, which we later go on to see in The Wizard of Oz, as a kind of mocking piece. But Elphaba, not really being too bothered about it, manages to walk into the room and pull it off like a goat, an absolute legend. Glinda then feels bad for this and begins to do an awkward dance with Elphaba in hopes to maybe bring her out into the group and not make her feel so shy and so judged. Then, a day or so before the events of going off to see the wizard, Elphaba realizes that something isn't quite right in the land of Oz. All the animals are slowly but surely stopping being able to talk and going back to making their regular animal noises. This is all due to some kind of chemical that they have been induced with to make them more savage rather than understandable. In a way, you could say this is another form of racism which is represented throughout the play and the film. And so Elphaba wants to do something to change it. So she thinks about the fact that she has an appointment with the Wizard of Oz. If she can maybe persuade him, he can maybe change things for the better. But little does she know the danger that lays in store and the plan the wizard really has up his sleeve. Elphaba then goes on to go off to the wizard along with Glinda in hopes of maybe meeting her idol. And at first she is blown away by his contraptions and everything that he has in the land of Oz. And it also turns out that he has a magical book that he can't read, and so Elphaba manages to read it and it unlocks her potential. She also bumps back into the madam/sorceress who has been teaching her at school, and it turns out that she is the one who recommended her to the wizard. However, little did Elphaba know that this was all a trap, and it's all a way of control. They want Elphaba to become the Wicked Witch just so that they can have a pawn in their game on a larger scale. Elphaba loses it with the wizard as she doesn't want to play along, and Glinda and her have an argument up in the tower. Elphaba tries to protect Glinda from the power of the wizard by essentially taking the fall. After being chased up the tower by the guards of the Wizard of Oz, Elphaba finds herself shooting off into the distance. But she warns the wizard with her powers after knowing that he has none, and every single piece of control he has is nothing more than propaganda and machinery. Skip forward to the second half of the story. It turns out that everyone has moved on. Glinda has become the idol figure for the Emerald City and is working under what the wizard and the other sorceresses' power has been pretty much promoting, and the anti-Wicked of the Witch propaganda that is floating around Oz. But, however, to make things worse, it turns out that the hunt for the Wicked Witch is stronger than ever, and they're all destined to find where she hides out in the wilderness of Oz. But to make matters worse for Elphaba's family ties, it turns out that her younger sister also has powers, and her younger sister is a witch who accidentally turns her boyfriend into a Tin Man. It also turns out that later down in the play that Fiyero becomes the Straw Man, or as he's better known, the Scarecrow. And now, if you're wondering exactly who becomes the lion, well, the lion was already in the story from the very beginning. He was a very scared lion cub who Elphaba frees back out into the wild with Ferrero in Act 1. But now back to Act 2. So, Elphaba and Glinda have an argument and essentially come to terms with what their world has become. Elphaba sees it for what it is and the power that the wizard has over the people of Oz. She calls on Glinda to maybe point everything in the direction it needs to be, and she also points out the fact that the only reason she was really annoyed with her in the first place is the fact that her sister, who was crushed under the house, his slippers were taken away from her. So after the events of the Wizard of Oz begin to play out and Dorothy goes to the wizard and then the wizard sends her to Elphaba, Elphaba is locked up in a tower with Dorothy and begins to get absolutely sick and tired of Dorothy whinging about wanting to go home. Elphaba, obviously annoyed after all the events that have happened before, she also points out to the audience, in the play version at least, that she has no intention of doing any magical things or turning her into frogs or anything like that. She just simply wants the ruby slippers back. However, though, Dorothy ends up splashing her with water, and Elphaba comes up with one of the greatest tricks up her sleeve yet. She fakes her death, making Dorothy believe the fact that she has been disintegrated with water. Meanwhile, back at the castle, Glinda pretty much exposes the wizard for what a fraud he really is and points out to him that if he doesn't leave now, she will have to make her own decision of a punishment for the Wizard of Oz. Elphaba then reunites with Fiyero / the Scarecrow, and the pair of them go off into the world, knowing that they are absolute outcasts to the lives they once lived, and the only way to be happy now is to move forward. So, what is my score overall for Wicked? Well, it has a great dynamic, it has the beauty of friendship, relationships, and so much more. And most importantly, it has the message of how messages can be distorted and changed and turned into a weapon. Many people who have obviously watched The Wizard of Oz would simply look at The Wizard of Oz and think of the wizard as a kind of header figure for being a royal in The Wizard of Oz. However, as many different adaptations over the years, and especially this one, have portrayed, they've shown there was so much more maniacal and darker features to the wizard. They also finally kind of pay off in this, the idea of giving Elphaba, the Wicked Witch, a chance to state her case, to kind of tell the world the truth about the person she really is. Glinda as well. Glinda comes across as this enthusiastic, over-the-top person who always knows what's right from wrong. But as she points out in the opening song of the film and of this, she kind of points out this idea that she wasn't always right, and that no matter how right she felt, she knew in her own heart that something was wrong in the land of Oz. Aero and Bok come across as two complete juxtaposed characters. Bok comes across as this kind of snivelling little boy who doesn't know how to impress anyone or how to approach anyone, whereas Fiyero comes across as this very self-entitled character who knows exactly who he is and where he's going. But as the play progresses, that position begins to change, and Bok begins to become the character who knows exactly who he is, and Fiyero becomes this character who starts to question who he is and whether he really agrees with the way that things are playing out in the land of Oz. Now, the Munchkins and everyone else in Oz really come across as these characters who have really been brainwashed into believing everything is good and great in the land of Oz. And the fact that Glinda has to reinforce this, even in the end, even though she knows she doesn't quite believe in it, really shows how much she has changed. She starts the film off as a character who believes in the same values as everyone in The Wizard of Oz, but slowly begins to realize that her friendship is way more important than the wizard's acceptance. The lion and the animals are absolutely the best showstopper of all of this. The idea that you have these creatures who are intelligent, who can speak, who maybe don't look the same as everyone else, but then to be fair, that is the majority of the world we live in. No one always looks the same, and if they did, it would make things boring. And the fact that the writers of Wicked bring this in makes this such a good dynamic, especially when you consider that the thing that makes them unique is being taken away from them. And this is what Elphaba is essentially fighting for. She's fighting for not just the rights of the animals, but for her own right. Because in a way, you could say her having magic makes her a threat to the wizard. And the wizard wants to eradicate that threat at any cost that he can. and he will literally send anyone, as it's shown in this and in The Wizard of Oz, he will send anyone to do this. Also, one thing we forgot to mention is the wizard is so manipulative and so diabolical that he actually experiments on the monkeys. Now, this answers a question to everyone who's ever wondered, where did the flying monkeys come from? Well, they came from an experiment he tried on Elphaba's magic to pretty much make the flying monkeys in the first place. And Elphaba begins to become even more hurt with herself when she realizes exactly what she's done. So overall, the story arc of all these stories and all these sectors and all these different versions and all these different crossroads down the yellow brick road really bring us to this great stopping standstill with this play, and for that reason I give Wicked a solid 10 out of 10. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next review. Until then, goodbye, stay beautiful, have an incredible morning or night, depending on where you are, and we'll see you next time.